To learn more about the work we're doing at Focus Conservation, check us out on our website at www.focusconservation.org. Your support in our efforts to take out wildlife traffickers is critical to saving these species. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome back to Restoring a Pet podcast with me, your host, Jack Gold. So today I'm joined by Timothy Santel, who's joining us from over in America. So thank you, Tim, for your time, and start by telling us a little bit about your background and the fighting against wildlife trafficking.
Well, thanks, Jack. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and give a little bit of an insight to not only my career, but hopefully a little bit of inspiration to those that have a passion for wildlife, and particular as I did as a kid, wanting to do something that could to make sure that animals were around for a while. And as far as my background goes, as you mentioned, I grew up in the United States. I grew up actually in the Midwest, in the middle of the country, and I've told this story a couple times. We grew up in a farming community. Didn't have a lot of money. And so, and I grew up in an age before the internet, and so, we didn't have a lot of other things to do other than play outside and enjoy the outdoors. And so, for me, I was pretty fortunate. I had a dad that was very into the outdoors, and the story goes that when I was a little kid, my mom sewed a backpack, created a backpack for me, and my dad carried me on his back out into the woods, and I was exposed at a young age to the animals. My dad was a hunter and a fisherman, but he respected the outdoors and the animals, and so from little on, I was out there with him, and experiencing the same things that he was, and so it was sort of a natural that's where my path would take me to where I am today, many years later. But as a kid growing up, as I mentioned, we didn't have a lot of money, so the outdoors was my playground. Every free moment I had that I wasn't involved in sports or in school, I was out there in the woods, getting muddy, looking for frogs and looking for birds and trying to identify. And the other thing about the fact that we didn't have the internet, and we had to do a lot of reading, and so I spent a lot of time reading about animals, and encyclopedias and different types of books. And for me, in growing up in the 70s, in America, there was a television show called The Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, and there were two hosts there that I was enamored with, Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler. And as a small kid that really loved the outdoors, loved animals, the fact that every week I could watch this television show, and these two individuals from Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom would take us on a journey across the globe and show us animals that I could only dream about. And so I lived through that television show every week, and so I got to learn about elephants. I got to learn about hyenas. I got to learn about pangolins. I got to learn about all kinds of things that where I grew up, I just never thought I would get to see. Of course, it was a dream of mine to one day to be able to travel the world and see many of the things that I got to watch on TV. But at the time, it was sort of a far-fetched dream. But nonetheless, it instilled a passion for animals and for wildlife. Another little side story about my dad. He also would come home after a hard day of work, and I remember he would sit around at the kitchen table and he'd say, "All right, what kind of animal you want me to draw?" And then he would draw an animal, and then we would participate, and so it was always sort of a theme about animals, and so that was how I started and grew up. Then, of course, when it came time to decide on a career and a career path, I decided I wanted to go to college, and I studied wildlife ecology, and I got my degree in wildlife ecology, and I thought I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. Again, watching the television show and seeing people across the globe that were studying animals, and I thought that's really what I wanted to do. And so I got my degree in wildlife ecology. Soon after I graduated, I was fortunate enough to get get a job with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service here in the United States pretty quickly right out of college, which was somewhat unheard of. But right time, right place, and went to the right school. And so I started off as a wildlife inspector for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And wildlife inspector is a uniformed position, but it was in the Office of Law Enforcement, the branch of the Fish and Wildlife Service that dealt with wildlife protection, enforcing laws. And so I was a uniformed officer stationed at the port of Boston, Massachusetts. And the thing about wildlife inspectors that probably most people aren't aware of, their role is to try to interdict illegal wildlife either being imported or exported out of the country, smuggling. And so I spent a couple of years there in Boston and started, again, I came from the Midwest, and now I'm living in a big city. I'm climbing up into sea cargo containers, going to the airport, talking to passengers coming off planes. I'm doing all kinds of things, a little bit out of my comfort zone. But while doing that, I became fairly knowledgeable and versed in different methods of smuggling, and it really opened my eyes to how big wildlife trafficking really was back when I started in the late '80s, and how it continues to grow even today. Unfortunately, wildlife trafficking is a huge, multi-billion-dollar industry that there's a lot of cliches and anecdotal stuff that people throw out. It ranks up there with arms trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, but it is certainly one of the top illicit types of goods that are being moved around the world. And for a variety of reasons. For one, in today's world, it's still not as viewed with the same sense of urgency and importance as some of the other crimes. And so penalties are relatively low. Officers are much less, a lot fewer of us trying to catch bad guys. And animals are somewhat more easier to obtain and than some of these other items. And so it becomes very lucrative. And what's happened during my career, from the beginning until the time that I retired, was we saw a transformation of more simple nominal crimes turn into more involved with transnational criminal organizations, organized crime. It became very lucrative. And if you think about it, transnational criminal organizations, uh, they're motivated by money. I mean, that's the bottom line. They don't really care what the commodity is. They don't care if it's drugs. They don't care if it's a human being trafficked. They don't care if it's military grade weapons being moved around to a terrorist organization. They don't care. It's to make money. And so they found that in wildlife trafficking, they can move commodities where the penalties were low, um, harder to get caught, harder to get caught. And when you did get caught, people really didn't take it serious, and that included, not only the public but also the judicial systems, not only in the United States but around the world. And so it was a win-win for them. They could deal in a product where if they did get caught, the penalties wouldn't be that significant. And that's all changing. Fortunately, it's changing, but it takes time, and things don't happen overnight. And so we really need to do a better job of educating the public on the importance of stopping the illicit trafficking of wildlife. Uh, Talk about transnational criminal organizations. Talk about the amount of money that's being made, and it's not just rhino horns and elephant ivory. It's pangolin scales. It's tropical fish. It's parrot species out of Central and South America for the pet trade. It's the live songbird trade in Southeast Asia. The list is endless. And when they're opportunistic, the bad guys are opportunistic. And so whatever's sort of hot for the moment, they'll jump on, try to make as much money as they can. And then when that fades away, they'll move on to something else. And unfortunately for animals, uh, we're talking about killing animals or swiping them out of the wild for the pet trade or whatever. Um, they can't be replaced as fast as some of the other items. And so when you kill a chimpanzee mother so you can steal her baby, or if you kill hammerhead sharks in the ocean indiscriminately in nets for their fins, they're gone. And unfortunately, their populations dwindle. And a lot of times they take out the best and most highly genetic animals out of that population. That also has the ability to impact long term the viability and sustainability of these populations. And so all that plays into has a role in affecting um, whether or not certain species become not only threatened and endangered, but at some point extinct. And so extinct is forever, and once it's gone, it's gone. And so growing up, I wanted to get involved in that. And as I mentioned, I was a wildlife inspector and in law enforcement. But then I had an opportunity to be a wildlife biologist, and I thought, okay, that's what I always wanted to do. Let me leave law enforcement and try to see if I had the same calling for as a biologist as I did as in law enforcement, wildlife law enforcement. And I can tell you that I got into that role, and I was only a biologist for a little over a year. And although the job is important and plays a huge role in making sure some of these species survive, I realized fairly early on that it really wasn't for me. And the reason it wasn't for me was I'm the kind of person that when I see something going on, I want to take action. When I see the bad guys, draining a wetland so they can build a shopping mall. When I see people, clearing out a forest so they can put a parking lot in. When I see animals being poached and killed, as a biologist, you can be upset about it, and you can write some letters, and you can make some recommendations, and you can do all those sort of things, but you really didn't have the ability to make an immediate impact. And so as a law enforcement guy, when you see something bad, you can take, as long as it's under your statutory authority, you can take action. And so that was appealing to me. So I left my role as an endangered species biologist, and I returned to the ranks of law enforcement as a special agent or a federal agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And that lasted about, as a federal agent, I was probably did about 28 plus years in that particular role. And I worked myself up the chain as far as career opportunities. When I started, you start out, on the front lines, doing what you can locally and statewide and somewhat and nationally here in the United States, dealing with species that are sort of regional to where you're located. And then as I did that, I became I gained a lot of experience. I had a lot of support from my peers to continue working in bigger and better cases. And you start developing a little bit of a niche for yourself as far as what your expertise is. And I soon realized that I really liked undercover work. I liked working really big, large, complex, hard to prove kind of cases. I found those to be really challenging. In fact, I got challenged right out of the academy. Just only months after being out of the academy, I was stationed in my first duty station, and I remember my new boss plopped a huge stack of file folders on my desk, and it was a case that was lingering, and they just couldn't figure it out and didn't want to deal with it, and so forth and so on. And he basically said, "Hey, rookie, see what you can do here, and see if you can figure this case out." It involved the poaching of a really highly protected desert bighorn sheep in Sonora, Mexico, and big game hunters were going to Mexico to kill this endangered sheep. And so I started looking into the stack of information, and it was a challenge. Of course, when you're brand new out of the academy, you got your gun, you got your badge, and you think, "Oh, I'm going to save the world." I can do all kinds of cool things, and you soon realize where your place is in society as far as what your role is. You learn real quick that maybe you're not capable of doing all the things you think you can, but I took it on as a challenge, and honestly, after a couple months of looking into that case, I was able to not only solve the case. We ended up charging, indicting, and prosecuting an individual from the United States who was involved in killing or poaching an endangered desert bighorn sheep out of Sonora, Mexico. And that was my first sort of, and this was only months out of the academy, and that was my first taste of working international investigations as they relate to wildlife. And so it was something that sort of stuck with me from that point forward all the way to the end of my career. And so as I mentioned, I was really interested in undercover work, and that it translated into working big international investigations. And so I started to gain a reputation as an agent that would take on that kind of work, and it led to, fortunate for me, I was very lucky to be, given the opportunities to prove I could do these kind of cases, and I was fortunate to make a lot of really good cases for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service with the help of a real good team of fellow agents. Together we made some of the biggest and most highly recognized cases in the Fish and Wildlife Service history during my 30 plus years working for the agency. So I'm very proud of that. But that just gives you a little bit of a background about how I got started in this. And again, you can either thank or blame my parents for encouraging me to play out in the wild. But that, and probably the television show Mutual of Omaha, Wild Kingdom, because those things sort of kind of ignited my passion, and it's a passion that I still carry today. I can talk about this stuff forever, and so I've been lucky. I had a great career, worked for a great organization, worked with great people, and got to spend, who gets to spend 30 some years following their dream and for me, it was, seeing animals around the world, seeing those animals that Marlon Perkins and Jim Fowler were putting on TV. And now I'm in Africa, I'm in Asia, I'm in different parts of the world, seeing these myself, and actually having the ability to impact, whether or not they stay around for a while. And so that's really where I come from. I come from, and if I can do it, a lot of people can do it. It's just a matter of following your passion and not giving up, and doing what it takes. It's a lot of hard work. I mean, I had a lot of success. I also had a lot of failures, and that goes with the territory. But if you can't be afraid to try things. And for me, I was always trying to think out of the box. Think of cases that maybe people said, you'll never catch this guy, or don't waste your time, or there's going to be politics involved, or if you do that, you're going to get in trouble. And, so those are always sort of challenges for me. And maybe, I mean, it started that, first couple months on board when I got a stack of folders shoved on my desk and I was challenged. I've been challenged like that through my entire career, and I continue to take those on all the way up until the end. And so, and sometimes they didn't work out, but if you don't try, you'll never know. So, but again, that's kind of a little bit of a background about how I got to where I am today.
Incredible. Also, I appreciate your frustrations with the environmental sector. Things take a little bit of time. There's always sort of policy and research, and you feel like you can't really take action and get things going. So I certainly mirror your thoughts there. You mentioned that through your career, trafficking has actually been growing over the years, and I'm curious to know some of the characteristics, be it certain species, the style of trafficking, how that has progressed in recent years. Is it different, different methods, different locations? How have things changed?
Yeah, of course, as it's no big secret. I mean, I think the creation of the internet has
Mm,
definitely changed the game as it relates to wildlife trafficking. When I first started, um, we didn't have the internet, and so um, how can someone in Indonesia uh, steal a baby orangutan and put it on the market without the internet. It's a lot more difficult. But today, I can sit in my house in the middle of the United States and get online, and with a few clicks and knowing where to go and how to do it, I can buy just about anything from around the world. And it's really made the game a little different, a little more difficult, a little more challenging, because there's such an ease about moving products from country to country now. Transportation's a lot easier. I mean, and as time has evolved, people are getting used to instant gratification. They want their stuff and they want it today, and so it doesn't take long. You pick up, you make a few clicks, you make a couple deals. Now you can pay online. You can check people out, and all this stuff plays into why wildlife trafficking still flourishes today. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to get illegal items. The other thing is too is when species now people can learn about what species are out there, and people see things. Certainly social media plays a huge role. TV, film, movies, they create these desires for things. People see something in a movie, or somebody has something online, or they post a picture on their social media account. Now all of a sudden that creates a demand, and
Mm.
so as the demand gets created, obviously there's people that are willing to supply that demand and fill that sort of role, and so that just sort of perpetuates the whole wildlife trafficking problem. And I think internet plays a huge role, because it's super easy to communicate. Now, as a law enforcement guy, I use that to my advantage as well. Either posing in a undercover or covert capacity. You create identifications, businesses, accounts, and things to interact with people and learn about what's going on out there. And maybe you learn about some things happening on the black market, maybe things on the dark web, things that are moving that you necessarily wouldn't see or hear about back in the day when you had to, go to a payphone to make a phone call or look at a map. I mean, now you have GPS and everything's so much easier and a lot simpler. And so, for an example, and I'm sure we'll probably talk a little bit about it, but I did a huge investigation involving rhino horns, and I only bring this up to illustrate, you know, when the internet started giving people the ability to advertise, these items were being openly advertised on the internet, and you could, in fact, when I started the investigation called Operation Crash, uh, rhino horn part of the rhino horn trade also deals with those horns are manufactured or carved into what we call libation cups. Libation cups were a sort of a status symbol or a symbol of either royalty or wealth, particularly in Southeast Asia and China, Vietnam, and Taiwan, and some other places where the rhino horns were seen as a status symbol. And when I started Operation Crash, I could go online today and I would see rhino horn libations cups being openly advertised on auction house sites for six figures, lots of money. And then once we did Operation Crash and they started realizing that we were able to move and track and trace and follow where these cups are coming and going to, those soon disappeared off of the internet, or at least and I think you see that with a lot of animals. For a while, you'll be able to get on the internet and maybe buy some things, but once they realize that the officers are also monitoring these sites, they find other ways to through the dark web or through various chats or forums or whatever to advertise their wares. But anyway, my point being is, as far as seeing a trend, yeah, I mean, now you can buy anything from anywhere and get it shipped to you fairly simple. And with a few clicks, you can pay somebody, and it's a very simple process. And so it's made wildlife trafficking a much more of a lucrative um, business for the bad guys.
And through your monitoring, how do you then go on to so how do special operations units sort of identify a would-be buyer or vulnerable species where they're in zoos or where they are? How do you then go about your work to uh, what's the word to seize and then to arrest the perpetrators?
Yeah, when my last 10 years with the Fish and Wildlife Service, I oversaw the country's Special Investigations Unit. The Special Investigations Unit was a special operations unit that I think when I started, there were only a couple members of the team. And then I grew that team to about 10 elite undercover agents that did large scale transnational criminal organizational type investigations that dealt in wildlife trafficking. And, you know, we, your question is how do you initiate those cases? How do you develop them? They're done the same way that the FBI does their cases, or the Secret Service does their cases, or the all any of these large police organizations. You use intelligence, you use informants, you use sometimes it's luck. You use undercover, covert means to infiltrate groups and learn what's happening. Some of it's trends, as I mentioned. Depending on a television show, certain animals become very popular, and once they become popular, everybody wants one, and that sometimes affects the population. But all these things sort of uh, contribute to how do you open an investigation. And I'll give you for an example. We had an attaché in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, um, and he was attaché for the Fish and Wildlife Service stationed there, and his role was to help the U.S. Embassy there and our counterpart agencies with the embassy uh, address wildlife trafficking issues in that particular region. And while he was there, um, he, you know, fortunate for us, he was such a good agent and a good attaché that he stepped out of the embassy and he began developing relationships with the locals in his area of responsibility, other law enforcement officers and agencies, and one of those happened to be the Ugandan Wildlife Authority, the officers from Uganda, and and the reason I bring that up and how this sort of segues into your question is. Uh, the Ugandans were working at a rhino horn, elephant ivory trafficking investigation in their own country, and they actually executed some search warrants and arrested some individuals who were actively involved in trading rhino horn and also ivory, and they seized I think approximately 13 cell phones when they did the search warrants and arrest warrants there in Uganda. Again, this is a Ugandan operation conducted by Ugandans. But when they seized those phones, they recalled some conversations that they had with our attaché from the U.S. Embassy, and learned that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had the ability. We had a lab here in the United States where we could analyze that data and that were on those phones and extract that data on those phones. And so those phones were provided to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through our attaché and brought to the United States, where we extracted the data from those phones that they seized during their raids there in Uganda. And the intelligence and the information that we were able to extract from those cell phones was just eye-opening as far as the extent of rhino horn and elephant trafficking going on there in East Africa. And that was sort of the genesis that got my team involved in the investigation of a large rhino horn syndicate there in East Africa, main trafficker by the name of Mwaza Kroma. those in the wildlife world, and particularly in Africa, would know the name Moaza Chroma as being one of the largest traffickers of wildlife, particularly rhino horns and elephant ivory. And
Wow.
so, how did that case start? It started because we developed a relationship with another agency. They shared their cell phones with us. We extracted the information, and then we realized that Moaza Chroma and his syndicate were moving money around the world, and including that money was being funneled through the United States. Therefore, it gave us a nexus to look into the financial crimes that were being committed, money laundering, by this organization there in Africa. And so that was sort of our opening to start an investigation on our own here in the United States of the Moaza Chroma Syndicate. And so we
Wow.
worked undercover there, or we joined forces with the US DEA, who were also stationed there in East Africa. And we were, we through this cooperative agreement with the DEA, we were able to use informants and undercover contacts to help us infiltrate that syndicate there in East Africa. And so we dealt in not only rhino horn, but we dealt in elephant ivory, and we also dealt in moving narcotics. In particular, we bought some heroin, and we were involved in some of the trafficking of narcotics as well. And so I think it was
Wow.
in 2017 we ended up kicking that investigation off, and I think it lasted about 18 months. And somewhere around 2019, myself and a small team of agents flew to East Africa to join forces there in not only in Uganda, but also in Kenya, and Senegal, and some other countries. And we put put teams together to arrest not only Moaza Chroma but also other members of his syndicate. And so it was a very successful operation. Moaza Chroma and I think 5 individuals from his syndicate were extradited back to the United States, where they were prosecuted and sentenced to prison here in the United States for crimes that they were committing there in East Africa. But again, the nexus kind of was the fact that they were moving money through the United States, and so that's again to get back to your
Mm.
question. Would you start a case? That's kind of one example of how we would start a case, but there's many.
Of
Um,
course.
there's just a lot of ways to start those kind of cases.
Incredible. Curious, you mentioned that there's certain movies or certain sort of high profile people who, be it on their social media, can cause certain spikes in demand for different species. I wonder if you could open up and tell us a few examples of where that's happened and where you've noticed it.
Oh gosh. I mean, the thing that pops in my head right off the bat is the great apes, the primates.
Uh,
You see some of these celebrities, you see some athletes, you see some uh, various people on TV with a baby chimp, a
right.
baby orangutan. Maybe they have a little menagerie in their backyard. Um, you know, Michael Jackson had animals. I mean, there's a long list of celebrities that
Mm.
had animals, and again, that's just one example. But and you know what's and so that creates this interest, and then it's just like it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from. I mean, I'm sure we're all the same. Hey, I want one of those things too, and then it
Yeah.
creates demand for it. And unfortunately for chimpanzees, excuse me, and all the a lot of the great apes, you know, they're not necessarily bred in captivity for to supply the pet trade. They're stolen out of the wild, and the way they get them out of the wild is typically you got to kill their mothers or kill other members of of their troop in order to get the babies. And then the babies are laundered through a series of brokers. Um, and I'm currently working teamed up with a nonprofit that we can talk about later called Focus Conservation. And focused conservation is based out of Africa. And what we do for focused conservation is we're all former law enforcement guys like myself, and we have a small team of former investigators from the United States and the UK that have quite a bit of international success in investigating, pretty significant crimes. And so we use our expertise and our experience and our contacts and our knowledge to help countries create wildlife crime units. And so we'll, in cooperation with a certain country, we'll help them start a crime unit or a task force in their country. And it may be members from several different agencies within that country. And then what we do is we mentor that group. We don't, we don't have any authority per se in that country, but we're there as an advisor and a mentor, saying, well, if I was doing this, this is what I would do, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to do it. And so we help them with their investigations. And the reason I bring this up is during I've been with Focus now for 2 years, and during this 2 year period, we've seized a few chimpanzee babies as well as a baby gorilla, and that were being stolen out of the wild, trafficked from country to country, and destined for places far away from Africa. And I'm thinking about this. I think it was one of the gorilla that we seized. We took X-rays of the little gorilla's name was Billy, and we took X-rays of Billy, and he had some shot pellets in his body, and you could surmise from that the mom was probably holding on to her baby when she was shot and killed, and there were some residual pellets that ended up in the baby itself. And so those are the tragedies that are out there that we see. But this group from Focus Conservation, these are the kind of cases that we're still working, even though we're all retired and we're working for a nonprofit. We're still trying to affect or trying to make a difference in some of these countries that have species that are vulnerable to wildlife trafficking. But yeah, I mean that's one example. But parrots, I mean, you see an animal. I mean, back when I was growing up, a television show, Miami Vice. On Miami Vice, they had a couple black panthers or black leopards that you could consistently see on the television show. And we know, and I know firsthand from probably it was the very first big major case I ever did, was called Operation Crash. And Operation Crash dealt with the killing of big cats for their body parts. And in that case, sort of was my first step into the water of really significant complex undercover work, where we're dealing with bad people, bad guys doing bad things. And in that particular investigation, it was, again, it predated the internet, and it predated even, for the most part, cell phones. It was me and another guy. It was a two-man operation doing this case, and we took on some guys out of the Midwest in Chicago, Illinois, who were actively involved in buying big cats and killing them for their body parts. Leopards, jaguars, lions, cougars, tigers. And in fact, by the time the case was taken down, I believe we documented close to 70 animals that were killed and skinned for their body parts. And the reason I brought that up was when I was talking about Miami Vice, I ended up buying 2 black leopards that allegedly came from the Miami Vice television show. And well, I didn't actually purchase them myself. The bad guy purchased them, but we were in an undercover capacity. We were there and actively helping him move these animals. And so I became aware that he had purchased a couple of these black leopards that were involved in the Miami Vice television show. But again, a case like Crash, it's opportunistic. It's money. You could take an old, not even an old, but you can take an animal, a tiger. Tigers are cute. Everybody think, see one on TV. Oh my God, I'd love to have that thing. But you don't realize, and I do, not because of the case that I worked. Um, they're only cute for a little while, and then they become hard to handle. They become expensive, and that's why you see them being constantly moved throughout the markets. Um, you might think you want one of these things, but they have long lifespans, and after a couple of years of spending more on food for your tiger than your kids, you realize, oh, geez, I don't think we can keep this thing, and so you move it, and it moves out the door to somebody else. And in Operation Crash, these particular subjects realized that dead tigers were worth a heck of a lot more than live tigers. Why keep it alive and feed it and care for it and worry about it killing you when you can just shoot it and you can sell its hide, you can sell its skull, its gallbladder, its meat was sold to a meat market in Chicago, bones, could be used for traditional Chinese medicine, so forth and so on. And so now that tiger that you may have bought from a circus or a roadside breeder or wherever, for you maybe you paid $1,000 for that tiger, you kill it, and after by the time you part it all out, you may have made $10,000 on that animal. And so these guys that I was investigating realized that you know dead cats were worth more than live cats, and so they killed them, and they killed them for the taxidermy trade as well as other facets. But you know that case really it it started with and this kind of goes back to another one of your original questions. How'd you learn about that case? Well, when I was stationed in my duty station in Illinois, I got a phone call, and I get these calls all the time, like people wanting to tell me, "Hey, I got some information for you," and after a while, you sort of, uh, I don't know, good or bad, you sort of discount a lot of these calls right off the bat because a lot of them sound like crazy talk. I mean, they just sound like, okay, there's absolutely no way this is okay, and you listen and you're polite and you do your thing, and then at the end, after you hang up, you're like, there's no way this stuff is happening. And that's kind of what happened with Operation Crash and all that, or excuse me, Operation Snowplow, how that case started with the big cats. Um, I got a phone call, and it was a person calling and say, "Hey, I got information that there's a group out of Chicago that are trying to buy big cats so that they can kill them in cages and sell their body parts." And so when you get that call, your initial reaction is, "Oh, another one of these calls," and I really didn't think it was probably going to be true. But, I took the information down, and I was polite, and I said, "Okay," I said, "Look, if you get some more information, feel free to call me and let's talk." I said, "But in the meantime," I said, let's meet." And again, I was a little bit suspect, but I thought, let's just meet and because this person indicated they had all kinds of information and they had notes and they had photos and I said, let's meet. But I had them meet me at a prosecutor's office. And I thought, like, well, if this person is sketchy or they're lying or they don't really have good information, they're probably not going to want to meet me there. And the person agreed to meet me there and proceeded to sit down and be interviewed for a couple hours. And so I walked away from that thinking, okay, all right, well, they met me and it all sounds like good stuff, but it still sounds crazy to me. I mean, I can't believe people be that brazen to kill big cats in cages and part their body parts. And so fast forward, I got a call saying, "Hey, I just got a call from somebody looking for cats." And during that call, they mentioned that they were buying 4 tigers from a zoo in Arkansas, and that the cats are being transported to a farm in southern Missouri, and the individuals are driving to the farm to shoot and kill them. And I'm like, okay. And this person gave me a description of the vehicle, and they added they're going to be pulling a Boy Scout, a trailer with a Boy Scout emblem on the side. And I'm like, okay. So quickly put together a surveillance team, and we sat on different parts of the of what we thought would be the typical routes to this location in southern Missouri. We sat along the various interstates, myself and a few others, looking for this vehicle pulling a Boy Scout trailer. And I couldn't believe it with my own eyes. I saw the Boy Scout trailer drive by as described. And I'm like, okay, this might be happening. And so we continued the surveillance, saw the Boy Scout trailer. They arrived at the farm and proceeded to kill the tigers. And then they hauled them back in the Boy Scout trailer and parted them out. And so that was my first time thinking, okay, well, this information is pretty real, and we're gonna continue looking into this. And so I bring that up as another way that we would start a case like this, and it came from a phone call. And not all you don't always just take a phone call and run with it. You got to vet it out. I mean, why are these people calling me? Is it because they're genuinely interested about protecting tigers? Are they, or do they have some competition? Maybe they want me to take out somebody that they're competing with, and so for that reason, you got to kind of check them out, and that's why I brought him to the prosecutor's office for the line of questioning. But regardless, I just bring that up as another example of how we would work a case that started from a phone call and turn it into a extremely important case. Not only did it raise global awareness to the killing of big cats, but it also impacted legislation here in the United States. The Captive Wildlife Safety Act was passed around that time that I took down the Operation Snowplow case. I've given numerous, I had to give numerous written and also interviews relating to the big cat trafficking, and brought that helped bring that subject to light. So yeah, those cases have impact, but again, we kind of got on sideways here. But it started with the Miami Vice live
Yeah.
black leopards that we ended up buying in Operation Snowplow. So
No, absolutely. First of all, apologies for my dreadful lighting. This hasn't quite happened before, but I'll fix that. Fascinating stuff. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about the resolution of Operation Crash and how that unfolded, and yeah, where that took you?
yeah, I mean, Operation Crash, it may be the biggest wildlife investigation ever conducted in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service history. Maybe it
Mm.
certainly ranks up there at the top. And it kind of started for, I tell the story. It's it's sort of there's when around 2010 or so, we had the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had a new chief of law enforcement, a chief by the name, his name was Bill Woody, and Chief Woody, when he came aboard and became basically the head of our law enforcement division, um, he took it upon himself to try to go out and meet with personnel throughout the country. And so he would schedule meetings or have conversations with people to try to get to know what's happening, learn the people that he's working with, and it kind of gave you a sense that you're working for somebody that kind of cared. He was willing to talk to you, even though he was the chief of law enforcement up there in Washington D.C. He was coming and spending a little time, and so in 2010 he wanted to meet with my team. At that time, I was supervising the law enforcement programs for 3 states: Indiana, Illinois, and Missouri. And so I held a meeting in Chicago with all my people, and I brought Chief Woody to the meeting to talk and introduce himself and kind of give his vision and mission, marching orders for all of us. And after that meeting, Chief Woody had a private conversation with me, and it was during that conversation that he indicated that he had heard about me, read a little bit about the work that I've been doing, and wanted to know if I would be interested in leading an investigation into the illegal trafficking of rhino horns. And of course, when you meet your new chief and he asks if you'd be interested, I mean, my immediate reaction was, sure, chief, I'll take it. Yep, whatever you want, we'll do it. Uh, Internally, I was thinking to myself, I don't know much about rhino horns. I've never really worked a rhino horn case before. I know there's 5 species of rhinos, and I know they're all protected, and you hear the typical cliches, all Chinese, aphrodisiacs and Chinese medicine, and so forth. I knew that stuff, but I thought, yeah, I'll take that on. And so, and a couple things I asked. I said, well, if I do this, I said, would you be okay with me putting a team of agents together that I feel would be really good? I wanted to have a little say in who would be working this with me. And he said, yeah, no problem. You'll have my support. You'll be able to, you'll have the funding, and you'll have the ability to put a team together. And so I felt pretty good about working this. Now, keep in mind, I still had this other 3 states that I was overseeing. I had a bunch of employees that I was dealing with, my own cases I was working, and now I got tasked with doing this rhino horn case for the United States on a national level. And so word started trickling out into the field that I was going to be leading a rhino horn investigation. Of course, I started to try to research and learn what was happening out there. And I learned about a case done in Colorado by an agent who had worked a couple of Irish nationals who had came to the United States to buy rhino horn. At that time, this was in 2010, it was an investigation called Operation Power. And during that time, we really didn't have a huge awareness to what we'd soon learn would be this worldwide crisis involving rhino horn trafficking. And so in Operation Power, these 2 individuals came over from Ireland to buy rhino horns, and they purchased them from a friend of mine, a fellow agent who was working in an undercover capacity, and he actually sold them some rhino horns, and they were subsequently arrested and prosecuted there in Colorado. But I learned that about that particular case when I was doing my research on rhino horns. But there really, in my mind, there wasn't a whole lot of other stuff going on. I was hearing tidbits here and there from various parts of the country. But I received a phone call from a peer on the East Coast. An agent out of Virginia called me, and he said, "Hey, Tim, I understand you're leading a national investigation on rhino horn trafficking." He said, I received a call today from one of my contacts in Europol, and the contact let me know that there were going to be some members of an organized crime family out of Ireland who were coming to the United States to try to buy rhino horn. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm like, well, this is the same thing that happened in Colorado. And so I said, well, give me more details. He said, well, I don't really have a whole lot of details. He said, I do have the names of these 2 individuals, and they'll be arriving in St. Louis, Missouri later today. And that's about all I know. So I had the names and I had the flight. And part of the story that I share with people is when I got that call, I was actually laying on a gurney giving platelets. Of course, if people aren't familiar, it's about a 4-hour process where they extract the blood out of your body, strip the platelets, and then they put the blood back into your body
Wow.
with platelets. And so I'm actually laying there on the gurney, talking to this agent. I have needles in both arms, and he tells me about the fact that these Irish individuals are coming to St. Louis, Missouri. Now I'm about 3 hours from St. Louis, and of course I'm right at that particular time. I'm not able to just get up and leave. And so after I hung up with him, I got on the phone and I called I had 2 agents that work for me who were stationed in St. Louis, and I said, hey, this is the information. I'm tied up right now giving platelets. I'm about, 3 to 4 hours away. But I need you guys to get to the airport and conduct the surveillance. And so I sent them to the airport to conduct a surveillance. And so after I got done with the platelets, I ran home, got all my stuff to spend a few days on the road, and took off and drove to St. Louis. And as I'm driving to St. Louis, I learned that yes, these two individuals did land, and they actually met the description that was provided from Europol, and they were watched as they got off the plane to the time they got to a rental car agency, and they rented a car. And these agents, my two agents, were following them, and conducting a surveillance and trying to see where they were going to go. And they gave me their locations, and I eventually was able to catch up and get involved in the middle of that surveillance with them. Of course, as Murphy's Law would have it, that particular day we were hit with a blizzard. It was a winter storm. The roads were very difficult to drive on. You could hardly see. And the bad guys, these two Irish guys, they ended up pulling off and staying at a hotel for the night because they didn't want to drive any further. Of course, for us, that created a little bit of dilemma because we didn't know where they were going. So we couldn't pre-plan where to go. So we had to continue our surveillance through the night at the hotel parking lot in the middle of this blizzard. And so we did that until we saw them get up in the morning, get back in their car and take off. And then we resumed the surveillance. And we ended up following them to a location in Macon, Missouri. And it was a well-known animal auctioneer who auctioned off live and dead animals. And we're thinking, this is a little strange. We got two guys coming from an alleged organized crime syndicate in Rathkeil, Ireland. They fly to St. Louis and they drive to the middle of Missouri to talk to an animal auctioneer. So we watched this vehicle enter into the building. The typical garage door goes up, the vehicle goes in, garage door comes down, and it disappears. And we don't know what's happening on the inside of that building. And so we're stationed around the outside of that building, trying to determine what to do next. And of course, we're waiting to see where they're going to go. After a couple hours being there within this building, the garage door comes up and the vehicle left. And we proceeded to follow and resume our surveillance. But then based on how they were maneuvering, based on what they did when they first drove from the rental car place, we knew that they were trying to do counter surveillance and try to determine if they were being followed. Because keep in mind,
Right.
back in 2010, just a few months earlier, two of their members got arrested in Colorado for doing the same thing. And so they were very, suspect on whether or not they were being followed. So I decided that we would back off and not follow them, and in hopes that they were just trying to, basically smoke us out and catch us. And that's exactly what they were trying to do. What we learned was that they drove several miles down the road and sat on the interstate waiting to see if any other cars were coming. And when no other cars came, they felt confident. So they turned around and drove back to the animal auctioneer there in Macon, Missouri. Garage door goes up, they go in, and they resume their meeting. And so that was an experience where they were trying to determine if they were being followed at all. Now that they were feeling confident that they were not being followed, after they left later that night or that day, we followed them back to St. Louis. So keep in mind, they get off a plane and drive directly to this place. They spend a few hours there, do counter surveillance, and now they drive back to St. Louis. And when they get close to St. Louis, they stop at a bank. And so I went in and acted like a customer to try to see what they were doing and why were these two Irish guys in this bank. And so I watched them talk to a bank manager, and they had a lengthy conversation and appeared to do a transaction or something, and then they left. And so my two agents resumed surveillance on them, and they actually ended up getting back on an airplane and flying to New York City. And so we got on a plane with him and flew to New York and continued our surveillance in New York City. I stayed and ended up speaking with the bank manager. And the reason I go through this whole long litany is the fact that this sort of is the genesis of Operation Crash, the biggest rhino horn trafficking case we've ever done.
Right.
It all kind of happened at that moment because when I went to talk to that bank manager, um, I actually observed a document that, or at some point during that conversation, I observed a document where it became clear to me that these Irish, we call them Irish travelers, they were
So do we.
doing business in New York City um, with an individual, and I got the individual's name and his business based on some information that I got during my interview. And so we proceeded to put that person from New York City and his business in our text system, which basically is an alert system for people that are coming into or out of the country. It gives us an alert if someone is coming in or out of the country. And so we entered that person's name, or we had that person's name entered at some point. Fast forward a couple days, we get notified that the person that we entered into the system had booked a flight from JFK, New York, en route, I believe, to Hong Kong or China. And so I'm thinking, okay, we follow these Irish. We know they do business with this guy in New York City. We followed him to New York City. We surveil him and got intelligence and information during that surveillance. Now we have a guy that they're connected with who is getting on a plane to fly to China or Hong Kong. So we ended up going to the airport and having a conversation before the guy boarded the flight. We pulled him aside, spoke to him, and we asked to take a look at his luggage. Inside his luggage was a rhino horn, libation cup, and some ivory
Wow.
that he was smuggling out of the United States. From that point, we had not only did we arrest him there at the airport, but we executed a search warrant on his residence. When we executed the search warrant on his residence, we got a bunch of evidence and information about a larger scale uh, effort to traffic in rhino horns, and that sort of proceeded to push us in all kinds of directions. We learned about how active the Irish travelers were in trying to buy rhino horns. We also, in fact, kind of a side note, they're called the Rathkill Rovers. They come from Rathkill, Ireland. They're sort of a
Oh,
organized criminal group, and they are the ones. If for those of you there in Europe, they're the ones that were alleged to be involved in the thefts of rhino horns from approximately 100 museums there throughout Europe. I believe
God. God.
over 100 rhino horns were stolen from museums a number of years ago. I think it were 15 different countries were hit, and it is believed that this syndicate from Ireland, Rathkill, Ireland, were responsible for the theft of many of those rhino horns. And we talked earlier about opportunistic members of these organized groups that are opportunistic. Well, these Rathkill Rovers figured out that rhino horns were extremely lucrative. And not only were they trying to buy them in the United States, they were actually trying to steal them there throughout Europe. And so that sort of speaks a little bit about the extent of how Crash grew, because once we did the search warrant, we learned about not only did the Irish go to Colorado and they went obviously to St. Louis, Missouri, but now I had evidence that the Irish had actually gone to Texas. And when they were in Texas, they purchased 4 black rhino horns. And this sort of illustrates, why rhino horns? What's so significant about rhino horns? Well,
Right.
they're back in the, and again, if you're keeping in mind, I started Operation Crash in the 2011, 2012 timeframe. Um, that coincided with the uptick in rhino horn poaching in Africa. And so there was extreme demand for rhino horns. And the prices that were being paid for rhino horns was out of this world. It was really crazy the amount of money that was being spent on rhino horns, particularly by those in coming from China and Vietnam and Taiwan and other places. But getting back to these four horns that the Irish bought, when they were in Texas, they bought four horns and they actually recruited a homeless person to make this purchase for them. Because when they tried to purchase
Goodness.
the horns, the guy in Texas was very suspicious of them. First of all, he had
Mm.
a hard time understanding them, but second of all, he was very suspicious of why these guys were came from Ireland to buy rhino horns, and so he wouldn't sell them to them. But these Irish men recruited a homeless guy and paid him a small fee to go in and make the buy of those four horns, and he did. And he paid $28,000 US dollars for these four horns. Now, these 28, that $28,000, those Irish then went to New York City and sold them to the same guy that we arrested at the airport, and they sold them for $50,000. Well, then he turned around
Mm.
and sold them to another individual for $80,000. Well, then
Oh,
that guy turned around and sold them to a smuggler, bringing them to Taiwan, or excuse me, a Taiwanese smuggler for $108,000. And then that individual smuggled them to China. So, in a matter of weeks or a couple months, you had horns that were sold in Texas for $28,000. We know for a fact were sold for $108,000, and presumably much more when they got to China. And that's just the black market price. So it sort of gives you a little bit of an idea of how valuable these horns are, and the crazy amount of money that was being thrown around in between say 2011, 2012 onward. When we were trying to buy horns in an undercover capacity, I think we were spending about $30,000 a kilogram for a horn, or at least that's what the going rate was for some of these. And so we were, which also, getting on another side note here, it makes it really hard when you're trying to do an investigation. You need a lot of money. You need a lot of money to buy.
of
When
course.
costing you six figures, you need a lot of buy money, and then you have to, think about the pressure of spending that money, and you
Yeah.
better make sure that it's all legit. You better make sure you to the guy. You better make sure you get your money back. All those sort of pressures that get put on not only myself, who was overseeing these operations, but also my agents who are trying to meet with the bad guys. But anyway, getting back to you asked how about Operation Crash. Uh, that's sort of I think about it now. Now that the years have gone by, had I not, there's a lot of things that you know decisions I think that were made that had we made a different decision, there would probably been a different outcome. If I was laying when I was laying on that gurney, if I wouldn't have taken the call,
Mhm.
if I wouldn't have called my agents and say, "Hey, go follow them," you know, if we wouldn't have been able to keep up with them through counter surveillance, if I didn't decide to pull us off, maybe we would have been detected. And I think maybe the biggest thing is, had I not seen that name, um, uh, and had the thought of putting that person into the tech system, we wouldn't have caught that person. And so all those decisions sort of played a role into what became probably one of the biggest wildlife trafficking investigations in fish and wildlife history. And then it branched out. I think we had, you know, but when I left, I retired in December of 2020. And when I retired, there were still a few individuals that had not been prosecuted yet in Operation Crash, but we identified probably close to 1,000 subjects of Operation Crash. We wrote over 1,200 case reports. We executed over 50 search warrants and arrest warrants. We conducted 40 investigations, and we indicted, I think, 54 subjects. And before I left, I think we successfully prosecuted 42 of the 54. And so there, still approximately 12 or so that needed to be prosecuted after I left. And we had so much. That case was so important for so many reasons. We were able to secure $7.9 million in fines and restitution. I mean, that's a lot of money. We put, I think, of all the convictions, I think we had over 500 months of federal incarceration assessed to the traffickers or the bad guys. I think some of the biggest takeaways from Operation Crash, man, we raised so much global awareness to the issue of rhino horn trafficking that, and truthfully, in all my years of doing the work, I don't ever recall the word wildlife trafficking or transnational criminal organizations or those sort of things being tossed around as they soon were after we sort of did the Operation Crash stuff. Now, wildlife trafficking was important around the world, around the globe. I mean, President Obama at the time, we were giving updates to people, high levels of the United States government on our efforts. He signed an executive order instituting, groups and meetings and organizations to be involved in wildlife trafficking. I mean, he brought the issue of wildlife trafficking to the forefront. And in fact, when President Trump came after President Obama, he followed that by specifically identifying wildlife trafficking as a high priority for the U.S. government when investigating transnational criminal organizations. So now we had two presidents who are talking about wildlife trafficking. We had a series of, I think there were many states in the United States that now ban the sale and sale, particularly of rhino horn or even elephant ivory. We had ivory crushes. We had rhino horn burns. We did a lot of. I mean, this raised so much awareness. One of the other things that I talked earlier about, we had an attaché in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. When I started Operation Crash, we had 0 attachés. In fact, it wasn't even something that we were really seriously talking about. Now that we did Operation Crash, now U.S. ambassadors were like, hey, how do we get some of those fish and wildlife guys to come to our embassy as an attaché? And so that started the conversation about attachés, which eventually evolved into an international program where now the Fish and Wildlife Service has, I believe, 12 or 13 attachés stationed around the world. That there were 0 when we started Operation Crash. We now have about 12 or 13 that are in various key countries around the globe that are trying to tackle the wildlife trafficking problems of those regions. And so that's another sort of positive offshoot of that particular case. One little known thing that I like to talk about is that we talked about the money that we generated, 7.9 in fines and restitution. Some of that money was earmarked by the court to go towards rhino conservation, and it was earmarked through a conservation organization that took those funds and they put them in particularly in Kenya, in a particular area where they were able to buy land for a rhino sanctuary, a black rhino sanctuary. And the really cool sort of full circle moment for me was about a year after that money got sent to Africa to buy this land for black rhino protection. A baby rhino was born on that land,
Oh,
a black rhino. And so
wow.
those are the things that, so when you're doing these kind of cases, you never know how they're going to turn out. Sometimes they don't even turn out at all. And sometimes they turn out really well, like some of the crash cases that we did, and snowplow, and many of the others that I was fortunate enough to be involved in. But yeah, it really kind of feels good to try to lead and initiate and have a somewhat of a small role in many of those successes.
Incredible. Incredible stories. Tim, thank you so much for your time. And where can people find you to support your work, find out more about can't speak, conservation, and just generally find out more about what you're up to?
Yeah, again, on Focused Conservation, we're on all the social media platforms. You can find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, X, Instagram. We also have a website. It's focusedconservation.org. You can learn about the work we do there. Again, the thing about it, and I'll just share this real quick with you. Focused Conservation was started in 2018 by an ex-DEA, a retired DEA agent from the United States, DEA agent by the name of Wim Brown. And Wim was actually stationed in Kenya when we did the Mwaza Chroma investigation. And Wim, as I mentioned when we talked about Chroma, we partnered with the DEA. Well, Wim was my counterpart for the DEA. And so I got to know Wim back in the early days, 2018 time range, or not, excuse me, when we did the Mwaza Chroma investigation, and his team helped my team with the successful Chroma investigation. While Wim lived in Kenya, he witnessed, he loved wildlife, he loved the people of Africa, but he saw a sort of a disconnect on how some of the nonprofits and NGOs were trying to tackle the wildlife trafficking issue. For me personally, again, we're investigators. We're the kind that we want to take action. We want to make something happen. And so Wim saw some of the same things I see. Is we have a lot of these groups that have are very passionate, great ideas, want to do some phenomenal things, but they're just all talking and talking and talking, and meetings and conferences and trainings. And it's like, okay, when are we going to actually save some animals here instead of talking about it? And so Wim thought, well, the way we do things in DEA and also in the Mwaza Chroma case, where we work together and put together these task force. And so when Wim retired from the DEA, he decided, you know what, I could take this DEA concept of working drug task force in foreign countries, and we could try to help foreign countries tackle their wildlife trafficking problems, using the same model. And so what we do at Focused Conservation is we help, as I mentioned earlier, we help countries create these wildlife crime units, and we bring them together. We provide some assistance, expertise, training. We do equipment, and we mentor them, and we're there with them 24/7. We have a technical advisor assigned to them in country, and so we have people like myself with 30 plus years of experience sitting there helping them work these cases. Because unfortunately, in many of these countries, they have all the same desires and passion that I do. They just maybe not have the opportunities, or maybe they don't have the training or the funding, or whatever the case may be. And so for us to be able to do that from either an advisory role or a mentor role, and give them the training and help them move their investigations along, we've seen a lot of successes. And as you'll see if you go on our website, we have close to 900 operations, successful law enforcement operations since 2018. You're talking 7 years. We've done over 900 operations. We've arrested several hundred traffickers in the last 7 years. That's pretty good. That's pretty cool. And so that's the kind of work that we do. I'm thankful that Wim, when he retired and because of our previous relationship, asked me to come on board and be part of his team. And so myself and some other Fish and Wildlife and US EPA and other US agents have joined our counterparts from the UK. And we're just a small group of former investigators who are trying to put our experience and what we can while we're still around, put it to work and hopefully help save some critters for future generations.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it.